it's already beyond where it was before. I think we're good. There we go. Okay, we're good. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy Friday. We did it. We made it to the end. I hope that you all are just as excited as I am to dig in on today's chat and learn. Before we do, I just want to go over a couple of quick housekeeping items. All of this is it's all for the benefit of you, right? For our audience members, our community, and we would love to see you. So please feel free to turn your cameras on if you'd like. No pressure to be Instagram perfect. I think I'm on day 3 of dry shampoo. So bring it. If you've got, furry coworkers or a non-traditional workspace, please feel free. We want to meet you where you are. If you would like to participate in the session today, we would absolutely encourage that. So if you have questions, you are more than encouraged to throw them into the group chat on Zoom. If you have other questions that you'd like to ask, but you want to be kept anonymous, that's totally fine. You just need to send them to me. You'll pick my name from the dropdown instead of sending your message to everyone. Today's session is being recorded, so no worries if you miss out on something somebody says or you want to review it later or send it to a friend. You can always go back and rewatch the recording when we're done, and we'll send you all a link to check out this video when it's posted on our website. You can also head right to our YouTube channel if you want, and you can check it out there as well. So if you have questions, comments, anything, please feel free to throw those into the chat. And feel free to take pictures or video as we go. You are more than welcome to share out to your social network, let people know that you are learning with PowerToFly today. Now, I'm really excited to introduce you to our speaker. I have gotten to work with Rob for the last 3 years, and he has been wonderful. Rob has been producing and managing promotional campaigns, including events and experiential marketing for theatrical works, rock concerts, and in support of global luxury brands. He's also worked with Broadway productions as well as television networks. So very, very impressive background from Rob. I'm really excited to hear his answers to some of your questions today. So we will dive right in. Rob, before we do, is there anything else you want to share with the audience today?
No, just really excited to share some info and some thoughts I have on this interesting time as we move back into live events, but also not leaving behind virtual events.
Yes, of course. Okay. So the last thing we want to talk about before we turn the floor over to Rob for his first presentation is some of the main takeaways for today. So these we kind of put together based on conversations with Rob, as well as by looking at the questions that you all submitted when you registered today. So if you have questions and you're not sure if we're going to be able to get to them, please feel free to ask them. Understand that if you joined us here for the live recording, that you get the chance to make the most of this. So feel free to drive the conversation. If you want to dive in deeper on something, let us know. We're going to discuss some ways that you can choose between hosting a virtual or an in-person event, some of the factors to consider. We're going to talk about how virtual events can really support your DEIB mission, as well as some simple steps that you can take to make sure that if you do have an in-person event, it is COVID safe. So Rob, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. You take it away. Just give me a high sign when you want, and I'll switch the slides.
Awesome. Thank you, Meg. Thank you, everyone, for joining and watching. You can go to the next slide. And we'll just talk a little bit about kind of things that you should be thinking about. So how do you decide between an in-person versus a virtual event? So first off, this may sound very obvious, but what is your goal? Are you looking to increase your brand awareness? Are you looking to make hires? Are you looking to engage your audience? Are you looking for B2B leads? All of these will help you decide what kind of event you want to host. How can your event reflect your workplace culture? So if you are having a return to work in-person culture, it may make more sense to host an in-person event than a virtual event. If you are offering people remote work or hybrid work, perhaps you would like to embrace a virtual event instead. Same thing with where your audience is located. If you are trying to appeal to a very widespread audience, if you're looking to spread the word about your company or your organization, perhaps a virtual event makes sense. If you're looking to target a very specific location, whether you're looking to hire in a specific location or your organization is only in that one area, perhaps an in-person event makes sense. What is your budget? Of course, that's a big question. And often virtual events can be a lot less expensive than an in-person event. And I can get a little bit more into that in a bit. And then, of course, what about hybrid events? So that's kind of the big question that a lot of people are asking. Actually, right before we started, we were talking about that. And I think a lot of us are still figuring out what that means. I think the one thing that we really want to be careful of as we start to think about hybrid events is making sure that neither the in-person aspect or the virtual aspect are suffering. Sometimes people, I think, can take away too much from either one in order to try to do a hybrid event. And what I'm often seeing is not, say, live streaming the in-person event for a virtual audience, but instead have some kind of unique combination. So one day of in-person trainings and talks while the rest of the event is virtual, or maybe an in-person watch-along and networking session while the rest of the event is virtual. But thinking about it more that way rather than, hey, we're just going to do a, Facebook Live of our event and people can write in questions that way. So let's get a little bit more into virtual versus in-person events on the next slide. So I want to talk really quickly about benefits of in-person events. So of course, the number one connection is in real life connections. Benefits is in real life connections. So, virtual events are great, but I don't think there's really any substitute for most people that an in-person event can provide for really making great connections. For one reason, you have gone out of your way to, change your schedule or get a sitter or whatever it is to attend that event. So most people are then going to make it worth their while in terms of meeting people. So that I think is a really great thing. You're really going to make those connections at an in-person event. Same thing with engagement. We run surveys at our events, and we know that when you are doing a survey at an in-person event, whether it is through a QR code or whether it's a paper survey, you're going to get a better response than it's going to be through an emailed survey. You're just going to get that engagement live. Same thing with questions. Like I just said, people have gone out of their way to attend the event. They're going to want to ask questions. They're going to want to be present there. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, another thing is to talk about, to use this in-person event as a way to reflect your in-office culture. So if you were requiring people to go back to the physical office most of the time or all of the time, then an in-person event might make the most sense because you want people to experience that office experience. You want people to see what the commute is. You want to see what lunch places are nearby. You want to see them see, of course, the physical office. So that's something you can really use an event for. And same thing also if you're looking to target a specific place. So if this is not a hiring event, but you just want people to know about your organization and you really only cater to a specific region, again, an in-person event makes most sense because people can see how you are part of the community. And then finally, of course, an in-person event, I think, is great for fun and giving out swag. And that's not to say a virtual event can't do that as well, but I think an in-person event can do it very well. And now let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits of virtual events before we get to some of your questions. So I think the number one benefit of a virtual event is that they are very inclusive and can be far more inclusive than an in-person event. And by that, I mean, if you are a caretaker, if you are a parent, if you are taking care of your parents, especially if you might be a single parent or, caretaking by yourself, a virtual event is going to be a lot easier to attend. Same thing if you are part of the disabled community or if you are part of the neurodiverse community. Again, attending a virtual event is going to be a lot easier. And of course, there's also COVID. If you are someone who has pre-existing conditions, if you have young kids that aren't vaxxed yet, if you have an older relative that you live nearby and you really can take the chance of getting COVID, again, a virtual event is going to be a great way to go. So there's definitely a greater sense, I think, of inclusivity there. And that actually ties into this next point, which is about a larger audience and reach and its impact on diversity. So especially if you are looking to hire, say, nationwide rather than just in a specific area, virtual event can give you great reach and also greater diversity. If you live in a mostly, say, white area, you can expand to, non-white people through a virtual event probably easier than you can through an in-person event. And if you're just looking to spread, more the word about your company or your organization, maybe not specifically looking to make hires, not specifically looking to do a more something more limited in that way, definitely a virtual event is great because you can have a global audience. That's one of the things I love about our PowerToFly events, many of which are virtual, and we can engage an audience all over the world. We can have speakers from all over the world, and we do. Another great thing is that you get the recording as a post-event asset. So when the event ends, you still have something that you can share with everyone who did not attend. You can share it with people on your social. You can share it with people in your pipeline. If you're looking to get new clients or new B2B leads, you have this other great asset that you can share with people. And that's something that a lot of people don't really take enough advantage of, is how do you use that recording after the event? And finally, the other thing is that virtual events are often lower cost. So sometimes you might have a really big upfront fee if you're paying for an event platform, but often that is a yearly fee that you're paying. So, it will work for all of your events. And then you have to think, in an in-person event, you're paying for food and beverage. You might be paying for security, AV, you might be paying your, elevator operator to stay late or a cleaning staff to stay late. All those kind of things add up. So a virtual event, of course, is much cheaper in that regard to the cost that you have to put on an event. So yeah, that's kind of all the upfront thoughts I wanted to share, and I'd love to kind of get into some of the questions that folks had.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. Okay, so let's dive in on some of these. We talked a little bit about kind of the pros and cons. When a lot of people want to know, like, which gives the best results. Now, obviously, that's pretty dependent on what you think of in terms of results, right?
Yes, totally. Yeah, I think if you are looking for brand awareness, then there's nothing that's going to beat a virtual event, because you can have a lot of people learn about your event. You are not limited to a specific region. Really the whole world is your oyster, or as big as you want. If you're looking maybe to make hires or do something like that, I think it can be a toss-up. It depends then on these other mitigating factors that I mentioned. Do you have an in-person culture versus a virtual culture? Something like that. What is your budget? Things of that nature, because you can definitely make either one work really well. I think, but it definitely goes back to that central question about what is your goal?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to focus on it, right? Because there's a lot of different ways that you can approach these events. So, all right, when we're talking about kind of that impact and that connection that is forged at an in-person event, do you think that virtual events can reach that same level of impact or make those same kind of connections? I know there's a lot of people that feel like that in-person experience really can't be replicated.
I think in some ways it can't. I mean, I think there's some amazing things that happen at an in-person event when you're just in the same room. I mean, over COVID, we've all, many of us, or at least I have attended, concerts and things like that, where, it's just not the same. But there's some amazing tools out there. As you know very well, Meg, for all of our summits, we start them off with a networking session on a platform called Gather Rounds. Gather Round is a great resource where you can randomly be paired with someone, and you can be paired with them for 3 minutes. You can be paired with them for, 10 minutes. You can do small groups. They have questions already. You can create your own questions. So there's great things like that. Obviously, there are Zoom breakout rooms. And then lots of, event platforms like AirMeet, who I'm actually speaking on an event of theirs next week, or Hopin, or all these platforms often have some of these kind of engagement ways built in. So there's, I'm sure, countless other ways that people can connect through that. and or have a community space after the fact, like PowerToFly also has a community space. So maybe you're not connecting live directly at the event, but then there's a space afterwards where you can continue the conversation with your other attendees.
Yeah, I do love that. And you're right, Gather Round honestly is really been a game changer for us in a lot of ways. Because you're right, it takes you from something like the summit, which is huge and wonderful, and we love doing it, but it also then gives you kind of the best of both worlds. Because if you do the Gather Around event, people do get a chance to connect one-on-one. We can, we do. I love the small group stuff. And honestly, the stand-up thing is really cool too. They've got a feature where you can kind of like each person gets a couple minutes on stage to
totally
talk to the group. So yeah,
and there's other things like AirMeet, who I'm meeting with next week. You can have a table there, and people can choose to join you at your table. It can be 4 people that join you at your table, or even more. So you can have that, small breakout session feel that you often crave at a in-person event in a virtual way. And as I said, going, back to the DEIB part of it, in many ways that can actually be more inviting to a lot of people, having that virtual element rather than having to go in person.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember, back when we were still planning regular in-person events, that was a big concern, right? Was like, yes, the company wants to show off their brand new headquarters, and that's great. And they always look so cool, and we love to see it. But you do have to think of things like, okay, is public transportation going to be able to get out there? Is this a place that's easily walkable, or is it something that people might have a hard time reaching? And so, yeah, that is a huge factor that I feel like a lot of us kind of forgot a little bit about over COVID, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So, okay, obviously the impact of COVID on events, virtual and in person, has been massive. Do you find, or are you at all concerned about having to try to motivate people to attend an in-person event when they might really just prefer to stay home because of concerns, COVID-related concerns?
I do think it's a real concern, and I think first off, event organizers need to acknowledge that and also put in protections in place for those people that might not be willing to. So that might not mean requiring masks for everyone, but maybe it does. It certainly means not shaming anyone that wants to wear a mask, or making it very clear that masks are accepted or even encouraged. I think it could mean asking for proof of vaccination. And a lot of that will depend on, the size of the event, the venue that you're in. Certainly if you're in a small confined space that's indoors, you might want to ask for proof of vaccination. You might want to require masks. You might want to have a separate spot where people can remove their masks to eat and drink, things like that. I used to work in Broadway, and Broadway has just extended their mask mandate through the end of June. So it's definitely something that I think different event organizers are looking at. And then I think there's other ways to encourage people to attend live, whether that is through giving out swag or giving out some other kind of benefit that you can only get in person. But I think the same thing can be said for virtual events. Even here at PowerToFly, you can experience, a lot of people want to watch the recording. They might not want to join live. There's ways to engage people live, especially if you're doing a virtual job fair. The only way, you can watch a recording if it's available, but the only way you're going to get your questions asked and answered is by attending live. So making sure that people know that, whether that's in person or virtual. And there's other ways that you can use gamification. We're going to actually start rolling out a badge system here at PowerToFly to reward people for actually attending live and completing certain trainings. You could do the same thing at a live, in-person event as well. So I think there's lots of different things that people have to take into account. And you might just, especially now as we're in this very precarious period, acknowledge that if you're hosting a live event, your numbers, there's going to be a lot of people that are coming out because they're super excited to finally come back to a live event. And then, but on the other end of the spectrum, there will be people that aren't ready to come back yet. And you might have to just say, you know what, our numbers might be a little bit lower now. We're going to have to see how things go moving forward. And I think that's kind of where we're at as, as a world really right now is what does the future hold in terms of live events and COVID? Oh, I think you're mute on microphone's off, Mike.
Sorry, thank you.
Virtual
No,
event right there. That is one thing
yeah.
that, well, you know what? A lot of people don't know how to speak into a microphone at an in-person event either. So
That is fair. Yeah, yeah, that is a good point. No, I mean, as you're talking through this, I'm thinking back to 2 years ago when we got on a call and we're trying to figure out, okay, like what kind of new concerns do we need to think about in terms of COVID? And you're right, it is greatly going to depend on the venue that where you're hosting the event. And even something we had talked about how in New York there were a lot of kind of protocols set that people could follow that would say like, okay, you're going to go to this site, you're going to sign up and show that you have proof of vaccination, and then the people at the door don't even have to do anything about it. But conversely, I live in a much smaller market city and we don't have anything like that. And so I do think it's important to think about the location and all of those things, but also like what other existing frameworks could you kind of piggyback off of to make kind of not only the registration process easier, but also to make sure that everybody is able to stay safe and you're not driving yourself crazy trying to figure all that out.
And I think communication with a live event is always very important because, like you said before, you mentioned public transit, like you might want to let people know where public transit is, where the parking is, whatever that is. But now with COVID, like you just want to make sure everyone knows, are they required to show it at the door? Are they required to show it in advance? Is it not required at all? Because that might be a deciding factor for people. Start that messaging very early when you're doing your outreach, have it on your event page, and then remind people several times as they get closer to the event, like, here's what we're doing COVID-wise, and now you can make the rational decision as the adult who's attending this event to decide, what you want to do.
Yeah, of course. So let's say that you're going to do an in-person event. And like you said, there will be people that go out for an in-person event that might not have done so, earlier, but because they're excited to be back among people and sort of feel a little bit normal again. And there's, conversely, like you said, there will be people that stay away. When you're thinking in terms of like venue, do you think that you should limit the number of people in the venue? Do you think that the limit that you would, do you think you need to budget for like a greater buffer basically because of COVID?
I think it is something good to take into account. For example, if you, like I previously mentioned, if you want to maybe only have a specific area with food and beverage where people know, hey, I'm going to take my mask off in this area. This is the designated area. So people who don't want to take their masks off, have a separate area, you might then need to account for more space to do that. So it definitely, I think, comes, will depend on, what kind of precautions that you want to take. I certainly big events like New York Comic-Con last year limited the number of attendees they had. This year they're not. So, people can, big giant events are doing these decisions. Theaters were sometimes limiting the number of seats that they had. So I think it is, it's not without precedent. I think it just depends on what your needs are. And certainly you could have a really small event in a small space, but you just also have to keep in mind who is your audience for that. If your audience might be mostly older, more experienced people, they might be less inclined to come because of some of the more inherent COVID related risks there. So I think it really, again, like so many of these things, is really up to your preference and speaking with your organization, speaking with your community and your attendees, what works best for everybody.
Yeah, of course. So we are almost out of time. I do want to try and touch on one more question before we go. How can companies show that they care about DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging within the framework or the confines of a virtual event?
Well, I think first off, it starts with your programming. So, you want to have diverse programming, and that is not, that's every layer of diversity there. So not just gender and sex, but, race and ethnicity, ability, age. That's one that we often forget about. So you're just taking all that to account, like who are people going to be seeing on the screen, and is that reflecting the diversity of your organization? Then as I said, I think virtual events are very accommodating in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Anyone can attend them from anywhere. So I think that is another kind of great thing. And I think, being very specific about what you're talking about. When we do a summit that's around a certain theme, not every speaker necessarily needs to be part of, say, that identity group. If you're not an LGBTQIA plus person, you can still speak at the summit that is celebrating LGBTQIA leaders. However, if you're not doing that, like, your talk should actively address that. Like, are you talking from the position of an ally? And if so, like, make that a very explicit as part of your talk. So I think there's many different ways to do that. But yeah, I mean, yes, and I see there was one.
Yeah, I'm just seeing that there. Yeah, CJ's saying it depends on the city you're having the event. They're in Oakland, and Oakland just lifted the requirement for proof of facts. And most people are still kind of limiting people for events in the Bay Area. So yeah, I mean, you can even have a drastic shift within the same state.
And within, the time you launch the event to the time you're hosting the event. Like here in New York City, our mayor has now been, is now not really on board with mask mandates coming back, but as our numbers continue to rise, that could change. So I think, like, you just have to have those kind of contingencies in place, especially if you're hosting a live event, like in-person event, I should say. You definitely need to factor that in, so the check-in might take longer. Maybe you're first not preparing for checking for masks or checking for vaccinations. That then becomes a requirement, or that's something you then decide based on audience feedback. Like, you're going to have to account for a longer check-in in order to do that. So all those kind of things. Same thing, I think, if you're planning an in-person event and it switches all to virtual. We're sponsoring an upcoming summit from a partner that had to do that exact thing, where they were planning a hybrid. Now it's all virtual because the numbers are rising in New York. So you just need to kind of take all those things, be ready for anything changing pretty much at any time, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. It kind of keeps harking back to the Boy Scout motto of be prepared. And it's like every event planner knows, you over prepare because something will go wrong. It always does.
Yeah.
And
this was the case even before COVID, as you said. Like, everyone had to, if you're in the events world, like, you were always preparing for all these things, having contingencies on contingencies. Now you just probably have a few extra steps that you really have to take into account.
Yeah, of course. Well, we are out of time today, but Rob, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time with us. And this honestly has been very, very useful. I think there's been a lot of really great, like, actionable things that people can think about when they're planning these events and making sure that they are considering all the factors. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I was going to say, if anyone who's listening wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm Robert Ribar on LinkedIn, and then PowerToFly, you'll see me. Or if you want to shoot me an email at rob@powertofly.com, I'm happy to answer any additional questions that people have.
Thank you so much, Rob. That is amazing. Loving so much, openness and trying to share knowledge and share resources. So I love this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meg. Great conversation.
Oh yeah. Thank you to our audience. Y'all asked some great questions. There were really, really interesting points. And so you gave us a lot to think about and a lot to touch on. So thank you all for that. If this was your first event with PowerToFly, thank you so much for attending. We're so happy to have met you. If you are a frequent flyer with us, it was lovely to see you again. I hope everybody has a safe, happy, healthy weekend. And we'll be back next week with more great programming. So see you then, guys. Bye.